It's such a blessing to be here at Secrets Unsealed, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you the message we have today. I do want to deal with one thing. In the number 3 presentation in our series, I gave a URL, and in spite of my careful reading, I erred. So I'm going to give that again. If you didn't watch that one, then just disregard this. But the URL that goes with the 3rd presentation, Church Leadership in Hermeneutics, is this: https://www.youtube, youtube.com, C-O-M is com, /watch, W-A-T-C-H is that word, then a question mark, then a lowercase v, then an equals sign, then a capital Q, and then the underscore is the next character. And on your keyboard, that's usually where you see the dash. It's the same one. So you make sure you get the underscore, and then you have capital A, lowercase g, uppercase V, uppercase C, lowercase g, lowercase c, uppercase W, uppercase D, and the numeral 0. And if you're still here, we'll go on with the rest. Would you join me in a word of prayer? Dear Father in heaven, as we are looking at these topics and seeking your wisdom and your help and understanding, please bless, send your Holy Spirit, and be with us as we think on these things. And everyone who watches, may we learn and understand better, and may you give us a word of hope. Lord, I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Our topic today is Dissolution or Revolution, Church Structure for Faithfulness in the End Time. That's the title I've chosen. And I would like to start by trying to think from God's standpoint for just a few minutes. The Protestant Reformation stalled, and you're raising up a movement. You're raising up a revitalization of the Reformation, a group that will complete the Reformation. You've worked it all out prophetically, but then this question, how do you organize the church for the end time? You see ahead because you have prophetic eye. Your eye is divine. You know the philosophical waves and eddies that will come. You see beforehand the rise of the ascendancy of human reason, of radical individualism. You see the coming of narcissistic, self-served thinking in the final age. You see all these things coming. And out of that froth of self-satisfied, psychedelic, end-time blindness, you are going to raise up a people, not just any people. You are creating a group that will endure through the last age. You're God, you're figuring out how to do this. How do you do it? How do you design that? What do you create? With what thoughts and ideas do you impress these people, this last day test tube laboratory, experimental people? How do you create an organization that will endure crisis after crisis, satanic ploy after satanic ploy? How do you do it? The interesting thing is that, and some aren't going to like this, but we've posed the question and we actually, I believe, have the answer. We don't really have to guess. We know something about our history, and we know how God has led us in the past. His intention is not random. He did not leave our pioneers to pragmatic fits and starts and random throw things at the wall and see what sticks kind of organizing. The first Seventh-day Adventists knew quite a bit about church organization. They came out of several different churches. And the system of governance they were led to use was distinct from the systems of all others. There were similarities here and similarities there, but our system is quite distinct. I propose to you that the system that God has given His church that we are presently part of is exactly what He wants us to have for this time. I believe I'll prove that to you. I know the church looks broken, but bear with me. I want to help you to better understand the way your church and my church, the way it's organized. Please withhold your evaluation of what I say until after you've heard it. Then you can reach a conclusion. But I'm going to not only describe to you how your church is organized for faithfulness in the end time, but I want to also spend some time at the end of the talk diagnosing a little bit the present problem and show you something about where the solution might be. So that's where I want to go with you in the remainder of this hour. God has built the solution into his system. First then, our thesis. The present Adventist church structure is a bulwark against cultural compromise. The different sections of the church should be more tightly interlinked with each other, not less. And that, I believe, is the important key point I have for you. Now, I'm sure that there's some skepticism in this room, perhaps almost everyone. But I happen to have Acts of the Apostles here from Ellen White, and I'm going to turn to page 198. I have in 199 and 200. I have just a few quotations I would like to share with you that I think will be helpful for us. Again, you're designing a church to go through the end time and be maintaining of its doctrines, the doctrines of the Bible. So here's just a few things I'm going to pull out here. Page 198, this sentence: even the best of men, if left to themselves, will err in judgment. Even the best. Who can you think of? If you could name, don't name them, but if you could think of a few people, 2 or 3 fingers, and count them out and say, well, I think this is one of the best, this is one of the best. Surely this person, again, the quotation comes to us, the word, if left to themselves, even the best of men, they will err in judgment. That's what God's contending with. Page 199. The greater the responsibilities placed upon the human agent and the larger his opportunities to dictate and control, the more harm he is sure to do if he does not carefully follow the way of the Lord and labor in harmony with the decisions arrived at by the general body of believers in united counsel. That's interesting to think about when God is designing a church for the end time, this principle. Down the page a little bit further, page 199 again, Ellen White's Acts of the Apostles. May God give every man a realization of his helplessness, his inability to steer his own vessel straight and safe into the harbor. And then on page 200, the longest quote here of these, at the bottom of the page 200. Notwithstanding the fact that Paul was personally taught by God, he had no strained ideas of individual responsibility. While looking to God for direct guidance, he was ever ready to recognize the authority vested in the body of believers united in church fellowship. He felt the need of counsel, and when matters of importance arose, he was glad to lay these before the church and to unite with his brethren in seeking God for wisdom to make right decisions. Even the spirits of the prophets, he declared, are subject to the prophets. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. With Peter, he taught that all united in church capacity should be subject one to another. And that's just a small sample, 3 or 4 quotations there for us. But those do give us, I think, some help in looking at some of the things that God has in mind. You probably spotted this common theme, our inability, our capacity to fail. We think of our capacity for success, but we really have an enormous capacity to fail. I think it is a great capacity, a great and dangerous one. More than this, if you were listening closely, there is the certainty that we will fail, we will make mistakes, unless we do what? Unless we conduct our labor, and the quotation said to us, in harmony with the decisions arrived at by the general body of believers in united counsel. God has built something into this system to help us go through these last days. Now, if you have your Bible, I'd like you to open to the book of Romans in chapter 12. There's a principle here that I think is an important principle for us. So if you go to Romans 12, verse 4 and 5, I'll read these, and we'll draw forth that item Here's what it says in the New American Standard Version. For just as we have many members in one body, and all the members do not have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another. Out of those two verses, there is a lot of insight for us, I believe, about how God would design or has designed His church to pass through the remarkable challenges that we face in these last days. So that's the model. That's the piece there. We have many members. Every member is an individual, but they are part of a larger body, and then we are members one of another. We are combined together. So I'd like to share with you, there's 3 or 4 different pictures I want to look at with you that you should be able to see on your screen, and we can bring up the first graphic right now. I'd like to put the first of these 3 graphics here. So now this is simple, so I want you to take a look at this graphic. This picture is going to represent the local church, the congregation where you belong. You belong to this congregation, and what do you have? You'll see that it's a very complicated graphic. You have the local church, and then you have the church board. Now I'll go ahead and say right now that this is a simplified, what you're going to see all here is a simplified version here. We're not going to put every nut and bolt here, but it will help us, I think, to get the broader picture. So you have the local church. You are a member of your local church, and what does your local church do to make things happen? You have a church board. The local church elects people to that board. So you have the body of believers. It's made up of individuals, of whole units. You are a whole unit. And so you are, God designed you so that combined in one person, you have the ability to act, to do, to think, to feel. You are a whole. You cannot be subdivided. We could say that you are an integer. But to keep it that you are one item. So you are one member of a specific congregation. Now, what are the main components? Well, again, first the members. In the Adventist Church, membership is rather strictly a matter limited to the local church level. Your membership is in your local church, and that's a distinguishing part of our system. You are accountable to your fellow Jesus followers, your fellow church members. They are your brothers and sisters, and your membership is held in a local church, and your General Conference President's membership is held in a local church somewhere. We're all brethren. Professionals and laborers, members of every stripe, we gather to worship, and we even wash each other's dirty feet a few times each year. It's all part of the local church. So that's the fundamental model that is going to be built upon, the local church. But now, how do all these individual persons, these integers, if you will, how do we make decisions as a body? Well, you have a church board. The local church populates its church board. It employs a system of checks and balances and nominates and elects a church board. There's different persons who play important roles in the process, but the essential pieces are the congregation and the church board. Those are your 2 essential pieces. Now, let's draw the graphic again on the screen, and I'd like you to take another look at the graphic and tell me what's missing. There you have the extremely complicated graphic. All right. What is missing? What isn't there that you would expect to be there? The pastor. Where's the pastor? The pastor's not on that graphic. I kept the pastor off the graphic. You see, I left him off on purpose. He's an important part of what happens, but don't forget, churches can go for years between pastors. When the Seventh-day Adventist Church began, virtually none of our churches were served by full-time paid clergy. So the pastor is one piece, but he's not essential. I wonder what it'll be like when I get back. But what you see listed here really are the essentials. You have the local church and you have the church board. Those are really the essentials. A local congregation, the members, the integers, as it were, the church board is the decision-making body of the congregation. Those 2 pieces are the critical central pieces. So now when the Adventist church was formed, none of them could have envisioned, I think, what we're going to show you now at the second graphic. So here's a simple pie chart that we'll be bringing up on the screen. Take a good look. This is a representation of God's end-time church today. So you'll see 13 slices for those who are counting. There should be 13 on there. And you have the different divisions, the NAD, the North American Division, the IAD, the Inter-American Division, and Trans-European Division, and so on around the way. You have the different divisions of the church. We're a global body, and so we have these 13 slices. Now each slice represents a division, and we have this. Do you notice the little quotation there from the church manual? Page 28, the General Conference represents the worldwide expression of the church. What did we read when we read from Acts of the Apostles? Rather, when we read from Romans 12, verse 5, we are members one of another. And so this statement in your church manual is telling us, I think, a very important item for us. The General Conference represents the worldwide expression of the church. So now, do you think of the General Conference as a group of distant people? We are us and we are not the General Conference, but they're them and they are the General Conference. Well, if that's the way you think, then I'd like you to think again. Yes, there is a large building in Silver Spring, Maryland, USA, filled with hundreds of workers. But where are their memberships? Do you know that each one of them has his or her membership in a local church somewhere? The General Conference is all of us. We are all parts of one world church. And the world church is a collection of groupings of local churches which are part of the conferences. And all of the local churches combined make up one general conference. The people in the building in Silver Spring are real people, friendly people. They have desks, computers, cell phones, pets, and they go grocery shopping just like you do. Something that might be a difference of some of them compared though with some of us, because we're a world church telling every nation, kindred, tongue, and people about the third angel's message that Jesus has given us, his present truth. The workers there do what they do in the work of God. They do it shoulder to shoulder with people from all over the world. They perhaps have a broader range of nationalities and peoples represented in terms of the people they work right next to than many regular church members would. It's a part of the fact that they are working in the headquarters of the world church. And I believe that's a gift from God, because it's a safeguard to help keep them from becoming trapped in a cultural bubble as just mere North Americans or Europeans or Africans or people from whatever cultural enclosure that they're from. It's easy to be trapped in your bubble, and when you're in your own bubble and all you know are the people that are like you, that live in your same town, and you've never left that town, and you went to school with those people, and that's all you know, it's easy to be trapped in that bubble and you don't know you're in the bubble. So at General Conference headquarters, there's a broad range of people. These things are not fail-safe, but there are a lot of helps and checks and balances, I think, in it. So if we think of this as the local churches being on the outside pie edges on our graphic again, we have the pie chart. The local churches are on the outside edge, and the people working in the headquarters are kind of at the center of the pie, where all the different nations and kindreds and tongues and people come together. Then we have this chart. So this pie that we have, this second graphic, is the General Conference. It is the world church. This pie is not separate from me and you, but you're on that chart. You're in that pie. You're a part of it. It's not that the General Conference is separate way over the mountain. You and I, we are part of the General Conference. You're not separate from the whole, outside looking in. You're part of the whole, and you have a voice and a vote in the whole. You're part of the mission of the whole, and your life and labor should be aligned to serve the supreme mission of Jesus, to use this end-time church to do the work which God has called us to do. So try not to think about the General Conference as them versus us. We are combined, the churches are combined in conferences, and we are combined in one vast group. So now let's go back to that basic element, the local church, and let's get the first graphic up again of the local church. I'd like to look at that again. You're members of the local church, and you have the church board and the people who are members, the people who the members elect to serve. So now take a good look at our very complicated picture again. And this is the model that you see on the screen. This is the model that the whole church is built on. Local church, setup of individual members. They elect representatives that are the church board. And when they meet together, they have a church business meeting, and they all have a vote in the church business meeting. So this is the way we're set up. All right, so do you remember that? So here's our local church graphic. Well, I'd like to come now to our third graphic, and this is the one we'll spend the most time with. I have a third graphic here that we have put together. I'd like you to look at the bottom row. Do you see those little churches at the bottom row? That represents our local church graphic, our simple initial graphic, because really the church is made up of a whole bunch of these churches all around the world. So we have these churches. The whole plan is based on this really simple model. There's a body and there's an elected group of representatives who make decisions on its behalf. So what you see here is the local church, and what is the decision-making body? It is the church board, and so I've simplified that to CB. CB is the church board. Some of you might serve on your church's CB. So you have the local body and you have the church board. You'll see that to the side there. Every local church has a church board. So now if we go up another level, that's the base level, go up a level, and you have conferences. So what we have there, the foundation is the local church, but a grouping of local churches makes up a conference. My conference, the Upper Columbia Conference, has around 110 churches combined in it. And so in this picture, we're just showing 3 churches per conference, just because it would be kind of cluttered to put hundreds of them up there. So a grouping of local churches combined together to form a conference. What is the decision-making body of the conference? Well, it's again modeled on the local church. It has a conference church board, if you will, only we don't call it the church board. We call it the executive committee. I've abbreviated that here on the chart, you see, with E, the letter E and C, executive committee. But it's equivalent to the conference is a church and the executive committee is the church board. So that's what we have. It is roughly the same. So then we'll go up another notch and look at our graphic, and I'd like to talk to you about the unions. So if you go up another notch, the conference is composed on the lower level, the middle level. The local churches make up the conference. You combine conferences, and they make up the union. So in our particular case, to give you a concrete example, I am part of the North Pacific Union. They call it the North Pacific Union Conference. But let's just say the Union or the North Pacific Union. Our union has 6 conferences that are a part of it. We have the Washington Conference, the Oregon Conference, the Upper Columbia Conference, the Idaho Conference, the Montana Conference, and the Alaska Conference. Those 6 conferences are the ones that make up the baseline for the union. So what is the decision-making body for the union? Well, each union has an executive committee, the EC there, which is kind of the union. If the union were a church, the executive committee is the church board. And so I'd like you to see that the local church, the local conference, the local union, they're all roughly the same. Again, not all the details here, but very roughly the same. We just call things by different names. So there's another word that you might, that we may or may not understand well, and it's constituency. The constituency is the membership. It's the group from which the whole is made up. So in the local church, you and I are called members. But we could just as easily be called the constituency of that local church. When all the members are invited to meet together, we call it a church business meeting. But it's also at the same time, it is the church constituency meeting of your local church. We just call it a business meeting. Now, by the way, the World Church has determined that every church should hold regular business meetings. It's right in the church manual, and it says that you should have a minimum of once a year, your church should have a business meeting. I hope your church is having at least annual business meetings. Some of our churches and conferences are just not holding their meetings when they are required, with the frequency that they're required to. The church manual says that the local church is required to have the church business meeting at least once a year. It's on page 128 of the current manual. You might want to visit your church board and tell them about this in some cases. Anyway, all the members can come to that meeting. All the members can make motions and they can vote. It's part of our representative system of church governance. If the church board were to start making decisions that are unrepresentative of your church, the church and constituency meeting can come and tell the church board, no, it is this way, not that way. The church board, and you can require them to move differently than they moved before. So every 4 or 5 years, delegates from every local church come together at a conference constituency session. Now, let's bring up the graphic yet again. And on the on the left margin, you'll see those letters CCS, UCS, and GCS. So CCS stands for Conference Constituency Session. So when the grouping of churches that make up your local conference come together, that becomes your conference constituency. They send delegates, and you have a conference constituency meeting. And then what you have, of course, is that when the conferences that make up a union meet together, when delegates from them meet together, they have a UCS, a union constituency meeting. These usually happen, conference or union constituency meetings, every 4 or 5 years. So you have you'll kind of always hear it called the constituency meeting. And so unions have a constituency. It's the conferences. In our case, in the Northwest, it's the 6 conferences that make up the North Pacific Union. The delegates from those churches come together, and that's the constituency. Now, this might seem kind of boring and uninteresting, but it may hopefully will begin to become interesting just about here. You're going to see a bracket here on the margin on the right-hand side encompassing all these parts of the church organization. So now, if we show the graphic yet again, the local church, the conference, and the union, they are elected by constituency. In other words, in all those 3 cases, you have a constituency. We're going to notice something kind of interesting here. So we have the local church level, we have the conference level, we have the union level. Now go up above this and you see something that's a little bit different. You see the general conference up there, and then you see divisions and in parenthesis. What's interesting here is that the general conference is elected directly by something called the GCS, we'll notice in a few minutes, but the general conference doesn't have a direct constituency. The general conference has divisions. Now, you might have thought that there's the local church, there's the conference, there's the union, there's the division, and then there's the general conference. That's wrong. All the division is a branch office of the general conference. The general conference has 13 branch offices. And one's called the North American Division, and one's called the Inter-American Division, and so on, with all 13 of those portions. The NAD is the GC. And again, actually the church at any of these levels is the GC. So what you have is this, but the interesting fact is that the NAD, there's a lot of things that maybe somebody in the NAD might want to do, but they might be unable to do because they have to do what the General Conference only allows them to do. And so you have this interesting difference in this point. So the divisions and the General Conference both have executive committees, but they do not have a constituency. So what do you have here? You say, but divisions are groupings of unions, and each division has its own executive committee. Why do we group them differently? And that's because they don't have that constituency. They are distinct in this way. Now, did you see on the graphic the GCS? Let's go back and bring the graphic up again. Over here, the constituency of the local church is the local churches gather together for the conference constituency. The conferences gather together for the union constituency session. And then you have this mysterious GCS. Well, when the unions gather together for their constituency meeting, we have a name for that. It's called the General Conference Session. And that's the way your church is organized. And the General Conference Session gathers together, and they directly elect the presidents of the divisions and the different officers of the General Conference. So this is roughly how the church is organized. The General Conference Session is the constituency session of the unions. Constituency for the local church, the conference, and the union, but not for the General Conference. Now, hopefully, some of this has not bored you, but you begin to see some pieces fitting together in a way that maybe some haven't seen it fitting together before. This is what one of our historians called the most complicated system of church governance that has been developed. But again, if you look at this and then flip to graphic 1 and look at the local church model, you know what? This super highly complicated form of church governance is actually very, very simple. It's all modeled on the local church. You are members, and authority has been distributed to you as members. You have a voice, you have a vote, either directly or through representatives. And this is the way God has put together this church. Now, in Testimonies Volume 8, maybe you wonder, is this really inspired? Or is this just kind of a human plan, a pragmatic thing, because that's the way it's often portrayed, is that the early leaders of the church didn't know what to do. They got together and they just developed this pragmatic plan, and kind of that was what we had. But let me read to you from 8 Testimonies, pages 236 and 237. This is something that Ellen White has written for you. Listen to what it says. Every member of the church has a voice in choosing officers of the church. The church chooses the officers of the state conferences. Delegates chosen by the state conferences choose the officers of the union conferences, and delegates chosen by the union conferences choose the officers of the general conference. By this arrangement, every conference, every institution, every church, and every individual, either directly or through representatives, has a voice in the election of the men who bear the chief responsibilities in the general conference. And that's interesting to me that she's outlined just more or less what we have. Did God just randomly say, yeah, they're going through the end times, we'll watch and see what they do? No, there's a system here that has a degree of endorsement through the inspired writing. And the church manual makes this observation. In Seventh-day Adventist church structure, no organization determines its own status, nor does it function as if it had no obligations to the church family beyond its boundaries. That's page 27 of the church manual. So that's an important statement, an important thing to keep in mind as well. No part of the church determines its own status. Something kind of interesting when we think about the present challenge that the church is facing, because we have parts of the church that are trying to determine their own arrangement. Well, we're such and such a union, and we decide we want to ordain women. Well, the world church has kept that criteria as a world church thing. The conference or the union can't come along and say, we're going to do what we want about ordination, and we're going to set our own criteria, because what? No part of the church can function as if it had no obligations to the church family beyond its boundaries. You don't determine your own standing. It's all determined by another part of the church. So this goes against that whole business. All the parts of the church are a whole. There's a oneness. We're all part of the general conference. We are the Seventh-day Adventist Church, singular, not plural. Amen. You have a voice. For many years, I'm afraid we've been guilty of two things. We have trusted too much, and we've been lazy. We've trusted leaders to come along and not be impacted by their culture or other parts of their situation, and that they're just going to do the right thing. And we voted in constituency meetings and said, well, I don't know this list of people we're voting for, but I guess I'll vote for them because everybody else is, and bing, and we voted for those people. We don't know what's their experience. And those people become our leaders or conference executive committee members. And there's a lot of good people trying to do a lot of good in that mix of people. But it would be better. In fact, God has made his system of church governance representative. It would be better if you and I knew who we were voting for when we were delegates, and if we knew who we're electing as leaders, and does this person that I'm electing as president or as secretary or as treasurer, whatever it is, does this person aggressively support the world church? I'd like to know that before I press the button and vote for that person. We have been too trusting, and we've been lazy. And the church is in the situation it's in because we're the Laodicean church, and that means a group of people who trust a lot in themselves, and let's just admit it, we're lazy. The church is in its problem. It's all those bad people back there or those mixed up people. No, wait a minute. Church is in its problem largely because we've been too trusting, and we've been certainly too lazy. So I'm looking at the guilty people, and you're looking back at the guilty people too. We're guilty. Church Manual, page 26, says this. This is the current edition. Let's see here. Okay, I'm on the wrong page. Here we go. The Seventh-day Adventist form of governance is representative, which recognizes that authority rests in the membership and is expressed through duly elected representatives at each level of organization, with executive responsibility delegated to representative bodies and officers for the governing of the church at each separate level. You're part of a representative church. You don't have a pope who makes your decisions for you. You don't have a body of 3 leaders. Some churches have 3 main presidents. Some denominations have 12. You know, we've got to follow the apostles' model, so they have 12 leaders. Some have a group of teachers, the magisterium, a group of people like that who are your top scholars and your top bureaucrats, and they make all the decisions for the people. Some churches have a big group of even many more bishops, and they make all the decisions. Seventh-day Adventist Church doesn't do any of those things, because that puts authority through a narrow sieve. We're a little bit less narrow, but it's still a very narrow sieve. If you have one seminary, it's easy to mess that seminary up. If you're the devil and the church says, we're going to have one seminary, boy, does the devil rub his hands together. He says, one? That's easy. That's a piece of cake. So God has done this with His church. He said, I'm going to distribute representation. I'm going to distribute authority to every single member of the body of Christ. So you and I vote in our local church. And every time you have a membership transfer, you vote on it. You have somebody who's baptized, you vote to receive that person into membership subject to their baptism. You have a new officer and you have a little vote. Where you have the nominating committee list comes in and there's a vote on that. That's like a miniature business session, and that is you in your representative capacity functioning in the church, exercising the authority that God has given to you to help things go in the right direction. We haven't used that too much. We've just trusted and been lazy. Well, let's move into the current crisis here. I think this baseline understanding we've been talking about will help us a little bit with our current crisis. It's difficult from within one's own setting to discern that you're in captivity to your own culture. We already talked about that a little bit. The present conflict in the church has not arisen because there's a defective structure. The structure that I've outlined to you here is supported by the inspiration. It's supported by the Bible and the writings of Ellen White, I believe, and it makes, not only that, it makes great sense. If we wouldn't be too trusting or too lazy, it would work pretty well. The present conflict in the church has not arisen because there's something wrong with our church structure. But I believe it has arisen largely because we have culturally impacted leaders. The Bible is really our safeguard to keep that from happening to us. We read the Bible over and over. We study. We pray. We have the benefit of our brothers and sisters in the church. When we get off a little bit off track, trusted brethren can help us to readjust and come along into the right direction. What has happened, though, is that I believe that many of our leaders, some of our leaders anyway, have become culturally impacted. They are doing what all the other churches are doing, thinking what all the other churches are thinking. And they can't seem to get it out of their minds. And so they come back again and again and again. And we have 3 GC sessions on WO, and if they could have their way, we'll have 4. Or something else. The western portion of the church, namely North America, Western Europe, and the South Pacific areas, are deeply infected with keynote Western cultural concepts. Concepts of egalitarianism, which have no place for the Bible version of egalitarianism. I don't have time to unpack that here, those 2 different egalitarianisms. But I would say that there are workers whom we can assume to be very well-meaning in their motivation who ought to be reassigned an opportunity given to workers who will respect the Spirit-led decisions of the church, the world church, in General Conference session. If you can't support the decisions of the world church, you need to be reassigned. It's just that simple. I may be reassigned when I land at the airport, but... Now, if you heard our first roundtable discussion last night, you heard Elder Veloso speak plainly about the current crisis, and I want to add to that again a little bit with our chart here. With regret, Elder Veloso described what has been happening as And he used these words, I think, reluctantly, but he described it as a power struggle. Let's bring up that third graphic again. I would say with regret that perhaps that is an accurate description. Because what you have today are unions trying to usurp the authority of the General Conference. So look at how this is laid out here on the chart. In North America, the unions, under the protection of the NAD from the General Conference, are trying to operate by their own preferred criteria. They want to ordain, many of them want to ordain women, and the World Church said no. The General Conference is responsible to carry out the decision that has been made by the General Conference in session. Some of the North American unions in particular, in conferences, are operating in opposition to the World Church decision. And what do you see between the unions and the General Conference on the chart? It says divisions. And in the case of our North American continent, the division in the middle is called the North American Division. So in North America, the unions are being protected by the NAD from consequences of their chosen, what they want to do. They're being allowed to do it. And our officers in the division aren't doing anything to prevent it. They are enabling. That's what we call it in other kinds of situations. We've heard of situations where one member of a couple is the enabler. Well, in this situation, I believe, the division is preventing action from happening that should happen. They are enabling their unions. You know what it is? It's congregationalism. It's just congregationalism on the union level. That's all it is. And in Europe, the Trans-European Division. You have unions and unions of churches under the protection of the Trans-European Division, and they're trying to operate under their own regional criteria. The World Church decided this, we don't like this, so we're going to do this, and the Trans-European Division is standing in the middle and is not causing them to come to where they need to be. So again, what do you have? You have congregationalism on the union level. That's the crisis that we have happening. So on the chart, you can see that the problem here is that there are unions and the divisions, and the problem is not the church structure. The problem is that the elements within the church structure at the union and division level, essentially at the GC level, because the division is part of the GC, are attempting to usurp the authority the World Church has vested in the General Conference as a whole. So this isn't just an offense against the leaders in the General Conference building of the General Conference. Remember, who's the General Conference again? We are. So this is an offense against every member, every one of the 20 million members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church should be, I don't know, I don't want to say we should be unhappy, but the decisions that have been made on our behalf are not being carried out because there is a insubordination at that level. The divisions are acting as insulators. They're insulating the unions from experiencing the consequences of their disregard for the World Church decision. That's the crisis in a nutshell. It's not the whole piece, but that's one way technically of talking about it. So this is why the essential component in the reconciliation process voted at last year's annual council was that it makes it more readily doable for the General Conference leadership to address issues in conferences and unions. You see, because it allows, if there's an issue, it allows the General Conference to go and address that issue and sort of bypass the division. Because what's happening? Nothing wrong with the plan for General Conference, divisions, unions, conferences, local churches. What's problem is not the structure. Now, think about it for a minute. If the problem is not the structure, what's the problem? See? Now, anybody who's watching this video, they said it, not me. They said the problem is people. People in those other sections, and I won't comment on that. So, yes, the structure is okay, but there are people in the camp who are not okay. And the church is in a crisis because of it. They're not leading, they're usurping. And so, that's where the problem is. Divisions are insulating, and that's why the essential component in the reconciliation process is that the GC can address things beyond the protection of the division which is standing in the way. And so the solution is not any dramatic change in church structure, but really what is needed is a change of officers in divisions and unions, workers who not only are willing, but are actually functioning in opposition to the world church shall need to be, shall we say, reassigned. That's the problem, not the structure. God has given us a structure to endure successfully and faithfully through into the end time. Structure is not the problem. In 8 Testimonies, Ellen White told us that was a good structure. Are there challenges and challenges even with that structure? Yes, because guess what? People are involved. Do you have challenges and conflicts sometimes in your local church? Yes. Why is that? Well, Pastor, there's people involved. But God will help us. He wants us to be successful. He's designed us for success. But there do come occasions when there is trouble in the camp. And so there you have an outline of some of these kinds of issues that we face. If the unions are permitted to overrule the General Conference, then it will be true that in its commitment to securing consensus with regard to denominate, that's a tangle. Let's try it again. If the unions are permitted to overrule the General Conference, what do you think the outcome will be? The unions will have their way on anything, right? Yeah, the GC will be reduced to a figurehead like one of these European countries where they still have a monarchy, but they just kind of show up for press conferences and passing out ice cream to the serfs. You'll have something like that. The unions will be in control, and that's what you will have. If they're allowed to override the General Conference, our church structure will be changed. Do you think that will work? Do you think that will last? Do you think it will be successful? Can the church function that way? It will be a change in the very order that God has delivered to us. What would happen? The representative system that God has so carefully given to us will be abandoned, because the unions will be basically the overgrown piece that runs everything. And that's what's happening. The church will have veered onto the path of fragmentation, becoming more loosely bound, and global mission will be damaged, if not eliminated as a possibility. Because what will happen? Local culture will act as a solvent, and it will become the strong basis for practice. So this division is in North America, and in North America, this is popular right now. What do you think is going to happen at the division level? Oh, we will never do those things. Come back in 4 years and see. What's popular in Europe? What's popular in another division, in this division, that division? The things that are locally problematic will become the driving pieces. And instead of being one church, will be a set of fragments. Do you remember was it a talk or two ago? The 7 women from Isaiah. Just let us be called by your name. But 7 different women. I think our church would break up into several different pieces if this is allowed to continue indefinitely. And then, of course, that wouldn't last. And then we would truly break up into fragments, completely into fragments. But would the devil be a joyful devil on that day? So I want to suggest a little bit of a solution. Some solutions work quickly, and some take a long time. Some take a medium amount of time. A question, if it's God's church, isn't it okay if it happens quick? Isn't it okay if it takes a medium amount of time? And if it takes years, isn't it worth it to rebuild and restore? Do you think Jerusalem, how long did it take? It didn't happen overnight. It happened rather quickly when Jerusalem was restored. But God has given us a representative system of church government. And in our local churches, we can be active. We can be in our church. We can be involved in what's happening. We can come to the meetings. We can have the ministry of attendance, as I've heard it put lately. Some of us are failing in the ministry of attendance. The church is having a special outreach or a prayer meeting, and we're not there. You're on the church board. The church board's considering something important, and you're not there. You're failing in the ministry of attendance. Church has a business meeting. Oh, it'll just be boring stuff about the carpeting. Well, so I'm not going to give the ministry of attendance. You know what? God, I believe, is calling us to give His church the ministry of attendance. Let's be in our local churches. When elections come and you get a phone call, hey, the nominating committee believes that God is calling them to ask you to serve as the Sabbath school superintendent. Then give the ministry of service. Say, I am honored by this. Even you might say, I really didn't want to be the Sabbath school, in the Sabbath school department that way. You know what? Give the ministry of service. Amen. If there's anybody from my churches watching, I have 2 nominating committees running right now, so I really wasn't planning to say it this way, but this is for you as well. Give the ministry of attendance, give the ministry of service. When your church, your conference has a constituency meeting coming up, what should your church do? You should find out how many delegates your church gets. You should elect as delegates people in your church who are serious about being Jesus-following Seventh-day Adventist Christians. You should elect as delegates people who are serious about supporting the world church that God has entrusted to us. Give that ministry to God through His church. Elect yourself some delegates. And those delegates should be people who will go to the meeting, go to the constituency meeting, and be present. And they should be people who are willing to be bold and sound like jets going overhead. They should be people who are willing to work and serve and have sit through some meetings that maybe are boring sometimes. You know what? Give it the ministry of attention, even if it seems boring, because it's God's church. It's God's end-time church. It's God's end-time Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I want to be a part of it, don't you? Amen. And I am a part of it, aren't you? Amen. That's right. So then why would I sit by and be a lazy, overly trusting person and let it spiral down in flames? It's not going to happen. Amen. It is not going to happen. Join me in helping it not to happen in your church, in your conference, in your union, in your division, in your general conference. God has given us a representative form of church governance. The title of this talk is Dissolution or Revolution. And that's what we face. Either working with the plan God has given us as one church, or letting the body become misshapen and have subsections of the church usurp authorities designed to be granted only to the general conference. Those are our 2 choices. If there's no intervention by actual leaders, the church faces dissolution. Not instantly. But if leaders will lead, and if members will become much more involved in decision-making in their church, their conference, their union, then there can be, and we want to be hesitant to use this word, but there can be revolution. Revolution in the church. God has given us the structure needed for the end time, but the workers must be faithful. Faithful leaders, faithful General Conference Executive Committee members, faithful officers, faithful local churches. Is it too much to think about that? Is it too much to do that and invest ourselves so that things are that way? This choice stands immediately before us, and I pray that God will help His remnant people. May God help us, and let's pray and see what happens. And let's be active and about our Father's work and see what happens.
I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who is tuned in to this special symposium on Scripture, church structure, and the path to unity. We really do appreciate you tuning in. We also appreciate the questions that have come in for our panel discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you some valuable materials that we carry here at Secrets Unsealed. If we don't carry them, I will mention it to you. You'll have to get them some other places. But I'd like to share with you some of the materials that we have available, as well as materials that I have written and prepared through the course of many years of this discussion. First of all, I would like to mention the book, The Tip of an Iceberg. This book was written by C. Raymond Holmes, a good friend. If there is one book that I would recommend everyone to read above all other books, it would be this one. Even though it was written in 1994, it is so clear on the issues, particularly the issue of hermeneutics, or how we interpret the Bible. Way back there, 23 years ago, Dr. Holmes discerned all of the deep issues that are facing the church today. This book is presently out of print, but Secrets Unsealed is negotiating to reprint this book and make it available. So stay tuned about this book. Once again, The Tip of an Iceberg by C. Raymond Holmes. Then, I believe it was in 1999 that the Andrews University Theological Seminary published the book Women in Ministry. And of course, the seminary at that time strongly supported the idea of ordaining women to the gospel ministry. So in the year 2000, there was a book published in response by several scholars of the Adventist Church who were opposed to women's ordination. The name of this book is Prove All Things. It's edited by Mercedes Dyer, who was my teacher when I was at the seminary, a very fine woman. But it is a book that contains a symposium of many different authors concerning this issue of women's ordination. It answers many of the arguments of the pro-ordination group. Then I want to recommend a book that is written by a non-Adventist. I don't recommend many books that are written by non-Adventists, but this is a good book. We don't necessarily agree with every detail of it, but the preponderance of the evidence is very, very good. The name of the book is Evangelical Feminism, A New Path to Liberalism. It's written by Wayne Grudem, who is a Reformed scholar. Now, there's been a lot of criticism against the idea of using Wayne Grudem and his arguments. But I believe that many of his arguments are rock solid, and in this book he answers many of the arguments that are used by the pro-ordination group. Then I have a book that I wrote way back in 2012, leading up to the special constituency of the Pacific Union, where the Pacific Union attempted to change its constitution to allow for women's ordination. And when the Union was not able to change the Constitution, they approved women's ordination anyway. I wrote a little book leading up to this event called Reflections on Women's Ordination. It speaks about the conflict that arose around the year 2012 over the issue of women's ordination. That's where the hornet's nest began to cause problems in the church. And then we have the same book in Spanish, La Ordenación de la Mujer, Sí o No. So this same book is available in Spanish. Then we have a book that was written by Eugene Pruitt while we were at TOSC, the Theology of Ordination Study Committee. Women's Ordination, 31 Popular Arguments and Biblical Answers. Very good resource book that answers many of the points that are brought up by those who favor women's ordination. Then probably many of you know that Secrets Unsealed, leading up to the General Conference session, actually sponsored 2 symposiums here in our studio. The first one was in English, and the title of it was Women's Ordination, History, Issues, and Implications. We had several scholars that we brought in and pastors, and they presented on different aspects of this particular subject. This series is available from Secrets Unsealed for the cost of shipping. Once again, the title is Women's Ordination, History, Issues, and Implications. This series is available on DVD. Then there are several newsletter articles that I wrote leading up to the vote at the General Conference session in 2015. The first of these is Reflections on Phoebe. It's claimed that Phoebe was a deacon of the church. And I go through a careful study of her mention in Romans chapter 16, and I show that she was a servant in the church. She was not a deacon, a full-fledged deacon like the deacons in the church today. Then many have argued that because Deborah and Huldah were notable women in the Old Testament that played a very important role in the history of Israel, and we would not argue that point, I decided to write an article titled Reflections on Deborah and Huldah. these two notable women from the Old Testament that made a big difference in the history of Israel. Of course, their prominence in the Old Testament is used by those who favor women's ordination to say that we should ordain women to the gospel ministry. Then I have an article that I wrote, Reflections on Junia, Fact or Conjecture. And basically what I do in this particular article is show that Junia was not an apostle. She was a notable person known by the apostles, but she was not an apostle. Then also we have an article that was prepared by several of us who belonged to the Theology of Ordination Study Committee. Task Group number 1 reviews the third option. Basically, at first, at the Theology of Ordination Study Committee, there were only two groups, those who favored and those who were against. But towards the end of the meetings, a third option appeared, and here in this article we deal with the third option. Then I wrote an article for our newsletter, Reflections on Hermeneutics, because this is really the central issue in this whole discussion, is how you interpret the Bible. And so I wrote an article bringing out the issues concerning hermeneutics as it relates to women's ordination. Then there's a sermon that I preached at GYC a couple of years ago, and it's related to this. It's called The Risk of Eternal Loss. It's available on YouTube. That's the name of the sermon if you want to watch it. And I also wrote a newsletter article titled The Risk of Eternal Loss. These are some of the newsletter articles that I wrote concerning the issue of women's ordination. Then we have the book, The Adventist Ordination Crisis, which was published by Amazing Facts, but many of those of us who belonged to TASC actually contributed to the arguments that are used in this book. Finally, two resources that I would like to mention. First of all, and this is extremely important, I would recommend people to read this because it basically covers the entire trajectory of the women's ordination discussion from 1968 through immediately after the General Conference session in 2015. The title is Reflections on San Antonio. This is an extremely important article because it shows the different strategies and political moves that were made to attempt to approve the ordination of women to the gospel ministry. I would highly recommend that you read this rather long article in this newsletter. Finally, this is not in a booklet, but it's an article that I wrote, and the title of it is Biblical and Spirit of Prophecy Evidence for Male Headship. It's a good number of pages. Actually, it's 33 pages. One of the big issues that is being discussed is whether the Bible teaches male headship. And I believe that this document proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that headship not only exists after sin, but headship existed in the Garden of Eden before sin. The idea of headship goes all the way back to eternity past. And so these are some of the resources that are available from Secrets Unsealed. Now you probably are wondering how you can get the newsletter articles, for example, that I have mentioned. Basically, all you have to do is click on Resources. Go to secretsunsealed.org, our website, click on Resources, and then go down to where it says Newsletter Articles. And you click there and you'll find all of the articles that are in our newsletters, not only on women's ordination, but also on other issues. I would like to just mention in closing that if you want this article on headship, that also is available there on our website, secretsunsealed.org. We carry all of these materials with the exception of the book Evangelical Feminism by Wayne Grudem. You would have to get that online or get it at an evangelical bookstore. However, all of the other resources are available from Secrets Unsealed. So I hope that you will check out these resources, these materials. I believe they're clear that even though women are extremely important in the church, God has given them functions that even men cannot fulfill. They have not been called to be ordained as ministers of the gospel in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It doesn't mean that women are inferior. Far be the thought from our minds that women are inferior to men. They are equal to men, but they have different functions that God has given them. So may God bless you all. And I trust that this town hall meeting, as well as the individual presentations, have been a blessing to your life. May God bless you and keep you in His care. And may God bless His church and bring unity where there is now division. Blessings to you all.